Hi everyone, welcome to week 9 lecture. This week's all about our documentation and linking our assessments, our planning, our documents and so on, so it all starts to make a bit more sense for someone observing and asking you what you are doing in your classroom or in your centre. So our plan for this lecture, I want to look at these 4 elements. First of all, to look at domains and the definitions of them and some assessment possibilities for them. We want to look at the process that we use assessment to inform our planning. We want to have a quick conversation about reflective practice, and I've got some example documents for you to have a look at from a wonderful lady online. So if we have a think about our domains, how do we assess development? Because it's very easy to assess achievement, but we have to think about how in early childhood we have development versus achievement versus what we actually can always see and define in some way. So our 5 domains, we've got our physical development, our gross and our fine motor. We've got our social development, which encompasses lots and lots of learning with our early years. We've got our emotional development, which is very tied to our social development. We've got our cognitive development, which of course is all of our knowledge-based things that we want the children to develop. And we have our language development, which is absolutely crucial in our early years. And that's where we start to really see our differences between students and children in our care. So what's expected in each domain? This is the hardest part for you. So I've put this link in, and I've also given you links in Blackboard as well. So let's have a look at some of the charts of what's expected in each of our year levels in domains. So I haven't gone down all the way to our babies and so on, but I thought let's focus on what we're going to be observing as part of your planning assignment that you've done and your assignment that you've got coming up where you're going to be teaching in classrooms of either pre-primaries, year 1s or year 2s. So I thought let's have a look at 3 to 4 year olds and 5 to 6 year olds. So our fine motor development of our 3 to 4 year olds. So most children should be able to do these types of things. They should be able to build a tower of about 9 small blocks by the time they're in our pre-kindies to our kindies. They should be able to thread some small beads onto a string, not just the large beads. They should be able to coordinate themselves to brush their hair or their teeth. And they should probably be able to dress relatively independently, including some big buttons, not the tiny little buttons on their polo shirts and so on, but they're big buttons. They should be able to pull on their socks and they should be able to pull on their shoes, particularly if you've got Velcro on them or you've got zips of some sort and so on. Probably doing shoelaces and so on, that's not expected at this age. But if children are not able to do that, sometimes it's not a developmental issue. Sometimes it is coming from the fact that they've got older brothers and sisters or parents who tend to do lots of things for them. So let's do a bit of a jump to our 5 to 6 year olds. So what should 5 to 6 year olds be doing? So this is, remember, our pre-primaries to year 1s. So they probably should be able to design their own Lego models or follow some instructions to build their own. They're probably able to write our numbers 1 to 10 independently. They may not have full understanding of one-to-one correspondence and the counting principles, but they should be able to write them independently. They should be able to copy a triangle. They've been able to copy a circle for a little while, but they should be able to copy a triangle because you think that has 3 different levels of stops and starts. They're probably going to vaguely be able to colour in the lines, not all the time, but they should be able to. They should be drawing some basic pictures for us. So when we say, can you draw a house and so on, they should easily be able to open up their own Ziploc bags, containers and lunch boxes, except for those horrible muesli bars that take forever to open and you often have to cut them. So they should probably be able to complete, say, a 20-piece puzzle. You wouldn't want to put down a 100-piece for most of the children. They'd have difficulties with those sorts of things. So they're your fine motor things, as well as, obviously, things like holding a pencil with a 3-fingered grasp and generating movement from the fingers, not the wrist. So they're able to confidently hold a pencil. You'll notice that in the 3 to 4 year olds, that was not something that they would be able to do. So getting kinder kids to do a whole lot of writing is not developmentally appropriate. Whereas we're moving into our 5 to 6 year olds, that's when they're starting to be able to hold a pencil, therefore they can be able to start to develop their writing. All right, our gross motor for our 3 to 4 year olds. So this is our large body movement. So our fine motor is our movements from kind of like our shoulder to elbow downwards, whereas our gross motor is our core strength, our body moving outwards. So at 3 to 4, they should easily be able to transition from sitting to all fours to laying on their tummy and up again and so on. They shouldn't be stranded like the turtles on their backs or anything like that. They should be able to roll over, look up. They will probably be able to imitate you standing on one foot, so that way you can do some beginning of yoga and those sorts of things in a classroom, do some of those wellness activities. They should be able to run with some degree of control. Doesn't mean they can stop, but it means they can run with a running motion. They shouldn't be falling over constantly when they're running. And you will be able to use that as a little diagnostic tool. I certainly did when children have difficulty running more than 5 or 10 meters. Often it means that they don't have very good control and they might need some occupational therapy. They should probably be able to pedal confidently on a trike. So a lot of those wonderful big sturdy tricycles that you get in your childcare centres and in your pre-kindies and kindies, they are fantastic. The kids absolutely love them. So you should be able to play lots of those games where you get the kids to walk from one end of the classroom or the playground to another, and you say, east, south, west, or 1, 2, 3, 4, or blue, green, yellow, and you get them to point in different directions and change direction and move. I used to play lots of those sorts of games because that's developing their gross motor activities. They should be able to jump with 2 feet together. So that's where you'll start to see in our childcare centres, they'll have obstacle courses where they put those nice little round things down and the kids jump from one to the other. Because what you want them to do is to jump with 2 feet together 5 times in a row, not just do one jump, but do multiple jumps. They should be able to walk on their tiptoes, but also put their feet flat. So one of the signals that children are having difficulty sometimes is they continue to walk on their tiptoes all the time. Again, they might need some occupational therapy at that point. They're walking, but they're not doing it in the right way, and they've probably got some muscle issues in the bottom of their legs and so on. So they should be able to bend over, pick up a toy from the floor, pop it somewhere else without falling over. They shouldn't have a problem moving their head down below their shoulders and being able to reach down and do something. They should be able to throw an object with an overarm action at a target. Doesn't mean they're going to hit the target. I did lots of beanbag games and things like that. So think, how do you actually get them to do that in different ways? And that can just be setting up some really cool things outside. I just used to have sheets with objects printed on them, and the kids would basically aim and throw, had little bean bags and so on. They should be able to roll a ball. So think about, you do lots of ball rolling activities with toddlers, move on and do the same sort of thing with your older kids. They should be able to think about how to catch a ball using their whole body, not just their arms. So you'll find some kids will just point their arms out at you. It's probably not the best. So you want them to think about how they can bring the ball into them. Now, again, that's beginning to develop those. They should be able to think about how to do it and try. Now let's have a look at our gross motor for our 5 to 6 year olds. So this is not just imitating standing on one foot, but actually being able to stand on one foot for up to 10 seconds. Again, this is a lovely little simple diagnostic tool for your children who are having some gross motor issues, who may need some intervention of some sort. They should be able to hold on to a book or something else and walk up the stairs, particularly if they've got one hand free to hold on to the balustrade and one hand to hold on to their teddy that they're walking upwards. They should be able to jump forwards now 10 times without falling over, and they should be able to skip after some demonstration. Goodness gracious, skipping is a tricky thing for lots of kids. Now, if you've got monkey bars available at some sort, they should be able to hang from the monkey bar for about 5 seconds or so. Some children have very low upper body strength. They just haven't ever had to develop it. So you want to get kids to think about how to bear their own body weight and so on. because they are often moving into physical education classes. They're learning to throw underarm and overarm. So stepping forward with one leg on the same side as throwing their arm, so understanding the opposite movements that they do. Walking along a line, so your obstacle courses take on a different set of things that they can do at this point. So you've got the jumping, you've got the walking along, you've got the hopping and so on. Things like performing a forward roll, so learning how to tuck their head right under and doing a forward roll, and catching a small ball using their hands only. So throwing and catching. Now, I find this is a skill that is rapidly declining. So think about how you can build that into lots of activities that you do. And now not just jumping from one thing to the other, but actually jumping over an object and landing with both feet at once. So putting just like a broom along on the floor and getting them to jump over the broom and back over it again and so on, or a skipping rope and things like that. So all of those are their gross motor development. So they're the types of things that we want fine motor and gross motor for our 3 and 4 year olds and our 5 and 6 year olds to be able to do. So now let's have a little look at things like our sound awareness. So these are things which you can start to build into your planning, and you can even do this for the planning that you're organising for some of our lessons where we're going out to the school. So think 5 and 6 year olds, they should be able to clap and count syllables. So computer, computer. They should be able to segment and blend their words. They should be able to blend 2 or 3 sounds together. So that could be our consonant vowel consonants, our CVC words. They should be able to identify the first sound in a word. So what's the sound at the start of dog? It's D. That makes the D sound. What letter is it as well? So you want them to be able to start to associate the words that start with the same sound and potentially identify those letters and things as well. You want them to blend 3 or 4 sounds together to make a word. And you want them to be able to hear the different sounds in words. So that one there telling which of the 3 words is different. Sit, sit, sat. You want them to be able to hear the difference in those words. Now, when we move along, we've got now for our, instead of looking at our sound awareness, let's look at our play and our social skills for 2 to 3 year olds. So this is going right down low. So 2 to 3 year olds should be able to look for hidden objects. So you might say, where's the froggy that you had? And they'll go and look for it. They'll understand that it's somewhere, that it hasn't just disappeared into thin air. They're probably going to be able to verbalize their desires and feelings. So I want to drink. They might scream it at you, but they will definitely be able to verbalize it in some way. Their speech has advanced enough for that. They will treat their dolls and teddies as if they're alive. They'll talk to them and so on. So they'll do lots of those pretend play. They'll play beside other children, so they're doing their parallel play. They'll use symbols such as a stick becoming a sword or a gun, which was my favourite thing with the little boys. And they'll engage in playthings that reflect less frequently experienced life events. So they'll remember going to the doctor. They might not have liked it. They definitely have had their injections and so on, but they'll talk about visiting the doctor. They'll be able to, you'll be able to set up play centres that are a vet or a restaurant, or even going to the pharmacy to buy some medicines and things like that. So all those little things that go on, or going to the supermarket and so on. Now, if we take that through, we've got a whole variety of things that we can do. Now, sorry, I had 2 of the same slide there. So let's have a look at our assessment and our planning. So we've gone through and we've made sure that we have planned appropriately for the experiences that we want the children to go through. But what we have is this idea that we've got to connect our planning and our assessment. Our planning and assessment should always be linked, and our assessment informs our planning and our planning informs our assessment. So the 2 are always linked. We don't just plan without taking into account what the children can and can't do already. So we have to think, what is our planning and teaching cycle? So we plan something based on the needs of the children as well as our curriculum. We teach play-based, intentional, and provocations. We create different things for the children. We assess how they've gone with the things that we've had as our intentional teaching or that's come out of the play-based environment. We can do that through formal and informal means. And then we go through an evaluation and reflection process. And that could be a peer reflection and evaluation. It could be internal processes that are going on in your centre or your school, or it could be some of the reflective practices that are talked about in our chapter 4 of our text. So all the different types of things that aid in you understanding how you create good planning for your classroom or for your centre. So we then go back and we start to plan again. We take into account the needs of the children and our curriculum. So let's have a think about the fact that when we plan, we write objectives. Now, our objectives should link to our assessments. We want to reword objectives to actually form the elements of our checklists. And we want to make sure that every piece that we're doing is easy to check off. Sometimes when I see people write checklists, they write very gigantic things that they need to check off, when actually you want to break it down. So if we take this lesson, rearrange 5 parts of a story into the correct order and retell the story verbally based on those images. I actually have 2 things that I want to check there. I want to see, number 1, are the children able to rearrange the 5 parts of the story into the parts that I want them to put? And the second part is, can they retell that story verbally using the pictures as a prompt? I could then add in more where I want them to retell it and take photos and put them in their own order. I've got all those other activities that I could build on from that. My first part is I want them to be able to rearrange the 5 parts of the story. The second part is I want them to tell it verbally using those pictures. So I take my assessment, I make sure that it informs my planning. So if they're not able to do the 5 parts of the story, I might go back and break the story down into just 3 parts. And that might be for every child, or it could just be for my 3 or 4 children who are having difficulties. So what does assessment look like in a lesson? Because I have lots of people say, okay, so I'm assessing, I'll just collect whatever they've done and I'll do it at the end of the lesson. Well, in an early years classroom, I often can't collect what they've done, so I have to look at it differently. So it might be my quick Q&A at the beginning of the lesson. I'm having a discussion about things. So I simply create some type of way that I can record that. Now, I then have my intentional teaching during a math session. So I've got my easel, I'm explaining a new concept to the kids, I'm drawing different ways that I form my CVC words and so on. And so I might have a little checklist next to my easel, and I've got some little notes down about the different children and how they responded. Doesn't have to be on every single child that I do, but I might have my 4 or 5 kids that I'm a little bit worried about, so I'm recording some notes about them. So that's my formative assessment on our main discussion topic. Now, I'm then heading off with my centre that I'm going to work at, and my EA is heading off to another activity centre, and the activity centre that she has, we're looking at our fine motor development of our pencil grip. So I've got some anecdotal notes on every child that I've been recording once a term, where I'm looking at specifically their pencil grip. So yes, it might be that I've got them tracing over something. I might have a little fill-in activity where they've got to trace their name, or they've got to line up where the aeroplane flies to move from this word to this word and so on. So my EA is going through how that will look like for each child. So she's recording that. Now, meanwhile, I've got my teacher focus activity and I'm looking at that story sequencing again. So I've got my checklist next to me and I can add to it from what I've already created in previous experiences, or that could be created something that I've done in my math session. So I'm actually adding on to it. So I've got a little checklist that's happening there. Now, this particular lesson, there's no summative assessment. It's all ongoing. Now, it might be that in a couple of lessons' time with my story sequencing, I actually want them to create their own story. I want them to take the 5 elements, I want them to put it into a sequence, and I want them to record their audio over the top, and we're going to use Book Creator to do that. So then I would have a summative assessment. So in the early years, assessment doesn't have to be a formal document or a worksheet. So it can just be something that is interacted with verbally with the children, or it could be purely observations. So instead of just sitting and watching the kids when you're outside on outdoor duty, take out a checklist with you and think, right, I'm going to observe 5 kids on Monday, 5 kids on Tuesday, and so on. And I'm going to look at the hopping skills and their jumping skills. And you set up a lovely little obstacle course outside, and you just encourage the kids to do it, and you're just sitting there taking some notes. It doesn't interfere with their play. They will want to do it, but you're going to be able to record some great data about the kids without having to do it in a really formalized manner. And then if you do want to observe a few of the kids, because quite often the kids who need the most work on it, the children who don't come over. So then you can just call those children over and say, come on, Johnny, come over and have a go at this. This is really cool. And then you can watch how he's able to interact, and you could give him some little hints and tips. So those things become your intentional teaching, but very specific and targeted. So let's have a think about what your records are going to actually start to look like. So this could be examples of what you might have in your classroom. So you might have some checklists that cover our domains and our learning areas, and that could be part of your file or in a digital in your Excel or in your OneNote and so on. You could have some rubrics that could be for longer projects or pieces of work. I find rubrics I don't tend to use very much in my kindies or pre-primaries. I do tend to use them in my year ones and up, because I've got something that the kids might do over the process of a week or two. And if I'm in year 5 and 6, it could be over the process of 5 weeks that they do. Now, I might have rating scales of some sort. Now, my rating scales could literally be a scale, or it could be a triangle, and I do 1, 2, or 3 sides on my triangle for how they're able to achieve certain things. So I have my rating scales for things like my gross motor or my fine motor elements. I might have individual notes on each child, and again, they could be in a digital, or they could be in a handwritten form, or they could also be in an audio form as well. Now, I tend to collect lots of work samples of student work, but what I've noticed in the last few years is that people are using Seesaw as great examples of work samples, and that teachers are sometimes taking it out of Seesaw. They've got it in Seesaw for the parents to be able to see, but they're also downloading the relevant children's work that they want, and they're keeping them as separate records. Now, you might also have audio recordings of their speaking, of their reading, of their phonics, of any of those types of verbal skills that you want to keep a record of. I find that particularly useful in my pre-kindies and my kindies, and even in my 2-year-olds as well at a childcare setting, because you really need to have an idea of how their speech is developing. Because remember, 2 is the age where you want to be hearing some speech. If you're not hearing any speech at 2, that's something that you need to have a chat with their caregivers, because that will be potentially something that might need some early intervention. And definitely if they're 2.5 or 3 and they're not able to communicate their needs verbally, that becomes a real issue for them, and often their behaviour will go out of the scale because they're frustrated. Now, I use now, because we have so much access to our technology, videos and photos of physical or social development milestones, and again, date them, record them, put them in against individuals in some folder system digitally. So let's have a think about your prior knowledge. Now, if we're making sure that we have a plan, teach, assess cycle, in the prior knowledge section of your lesson plan, you write what the students already know or have demonstrated for you. In one-off lessons, such as you are planning for assignments and so on, you would use the curriculum documents from the previous year to inform that section. Early years, that's a bit trickier, so you would possibly use some of the checklists from earlier age groups to inform it. But remember, the checklists are often developmental as well. In a classroom, when you are working with the children, you'll know what you've taught, which is what you assume is a prior knowledge, but remember, what you teach and what the children learn are 2 different things. So you know what you've taught, and you know what the children have demonstrated. So that's what you put in the prior knowledge. So for your lesson plans that you're doing for the students, you would use for the first lesson the curriculum documents from the previous year. For the second and third lesson, you know what you've already done with them, so you're able to base it on that. So let's have a think. In chapter 4 that you had as your reading for this week, the reflective practice in action talks about this type of cycle where you want to assess, record, analyze, reflect, and then plan new experiences. It basically follows exactly the same format where you plan, you teach, assess, you reflect, you evaluate, and so on, and then you go back and do your planning again. So with that documentation, your assessment cycle has to be shown in your documentation. So all schools and childcare settings will require some type of documentation. That will vary very much so according to the different setting. Now, if you're working in a childcare, often they have proprietary documents that they will use. In a school setting, and you are on prac, you use our Notre Dame documents. But in a school setting, when you're not on prac, when you've already graduated, some schools will have documents that they would like you to use. Other schools have none, and you get to choose what you wish. Teachers Pay Teachers, Have Lot, Twinkle, any of those sorts of places. They have 1,000,001 different versions of it. There's also some great Facebook groups of and Etsy people who are creating wonderful teacher documents for you in paper formats or digital formats, completely your choice. What it really comes down to is the format's not important. What's important is the content and the regularity of your records. And you have to think about, do you need key stakeholders to be able to access your documentation? So if you do, then you have to make sure that they're ready and available for them in some format that will work. And again, that's where a lot of schools and childcare settings are using apps like Seesaw so that they can have their parents see what's going on. So I found this amazing educator, and she is running a home childcare. So family daycare of some sort. She's called the Empowered Educator. I'm just going to take you through her documentation that she has. So obviously this is all based around a home childcare setting. So she's probably working with 0 to 4-year-olds in some way, but let's have a look at what she does. So she creates her anecdotal records, but she uses them to then inform her forward planning. So she writes down the child's name, the observation format used, the analysis of the learning, the future planning ideas, and so on. So she's really taking her notes with that idea of thinking of how she future plans, just when she's starting to take those notes in the first place. She uses learning stories and learning journeys to document what's been going on with a child. So these look like to us random photos, but she would put the story that matches into all of those. So you can see there's a particular book that the child is reading. They've then had a particular adventure in the playground of some sort. They've collected some things, and then they've gone through the process of creating a funny looking face. So she would document that learning journey. Now, she uses a lot of photos. And again, these photos can be things that you can print. We've all got access on our phones, our iPads, or whatever digital device that we have. So then you can easily transfer those into some format that can be shared with the parents. She's put them onto one document, and then she constantly talks about the story that the photos tell us. So it's not just sharing happy snaps, but it's actually going through what is the process and the point of her work. Now, she uses daily journals, and that is for each child in her care each day. And again, what has the learning done and where might it lead us, and what are the voices from the children? So very much informed by a Reggio approach with this. Her weekly reflections, she goes through a process of reflecting on her program plan and planning ideas for the next week. And that's taking into account the children's ideas as well, not just the teacher ideas. She then takes into account her individual planning notes. So she's got this for each child or for herself. So she has her daily reflection, her formats, and her photo collage, the analysis of the learning, the future learning, and so on. And so she's putting these into practice. So again, she's making sure that her planning and her teaching are linked, and her assessment informs her planning. So she then has to make sure that she has adequate documentation to parents. So she puts in a little message from herself to the parent. She puts in what the child has completed as part of their day, and then she does exactly the same thing on the next part. Really simple checklist, and you'll find these are available in every childcare setting. It's something, however, that we don't do a huge amount of in schools. But I'm finding now with this transition to Seesaw that we're actually seeing a little bit more of this type of documentation starting to happen in lots of our schools. And I think it can only be a good thing for us. So her programming, she takes her ideas from the children, but she gives herself some guides. So these are very similar to your concept maps that you have. So the one on the left looks at it from different topics. The one on the right looks at it from our domains, as well as some various other teaching points that she wants to include in there. So I thought that was a really clear set of documents that she uses, just so you can also see that we have a strong obligation in teaching to ensure that we have adequate documents that articulate our planning processes, what we've taught, how we've assessed it, and why we're going back and reteaching, or why we're going back and moving on to different topics and so on. So we are articulating our plan, teach, assess cycle in a variety of different forms. So let's have a think about our lecture review. So we want to find and use domain-focused checklists to assist in your observations, your assessments, and your planning. We want to link your assessment to your planning to follow a plan, teach, assess, and reflect cycle. Your documentation will look different, but the purpose is the same. You want to collect data to plan better experiences. You need to show evidence of your plan, teach, assess, reflect, and plan cycle in your final assessment for this unit. So that's the important part that you need. So you've got to make sure that you are including all of that, because remember, with this unit, we don't have an exam. I need to be able to demonstrate, because the unit is titled Planning and Evaluation for 0 to 8-year-olds. So I need to know that you have really good idea of this plan, teach, assess cycle. All right, that is the end of our day. So next week, we are at the school on Monday. At Tuesday, your tutorial group is at uni for a play and plan session. We then have our week's break. Then for week 10 of uni, both of our groups are going to be at uni for plan and play sessions. And then in the first week, it changes again. All right, so lecture will be online again in week 10, and week 11 I will advise you as to what we're doing. So thanks everyone for listening. I look forward to seeing my people at uni and seeing how Lee's group goes with their plan and play session as well. So thanks everyone.